Opening debate, the Honourable Member for Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I echo the comments that have been made, welcoming you back to the chair. I am pleased to have the opportunity to rise and speak on this important piece of legislation. Bill C-2, an act respecting certain measures relating to the security of the border between Canada and the United States and respecting other related security measures. Finally, after a decade of inaction and repeated failures, the Liberals have tabled a so-called Stronger Borders Act, which gives the appearance of taking border security more seriously. But the fact is, this legislation is packed with measures that Canadians didn't ask for. It is a travesty that this government has allowed so many problems to fester for so long and cause so much damage to Canadians. This sweeping piece of legislation that the government claims will strengthen our border, protect Canada's sovereignty, and keep Canadians safe amends the following. The Customs Act. It adds fentanyl to Schedule 5 to Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. It amends the Canada Post Corporation Act, the Oceans Act, the Immigration and Refugee Act, the Department of Citizenship and Immigration Act, the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act, the Superintendent of Financial Institutions Act, the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act, the Sex Offender Information Registry Act, and it introduces the Supporting Authorized Access to Information Act. That's one to pay attention to. For years, the government, knowing that we had severe problems at our border with the United States, dragged their feet on addressing any of the issues. In fact, they even lashed out at law-abiding Canadians when they raised concerns about the rise in gun crimes under this Liberal government in the hopes that the Liberals would crack down on criminals and illegal firearms. Instead, the government started targeting law-abiding firearms owners. They treated them as if they were dangerous criminals that needed to be dealt with. We all knew that illegal firearms being smuggled across the border to be used by street gangs were what needed to be dealt with. The government needed to stop them from crossing the border so that they couldn't be used to rob, injure, or kill Canadians. But what did they do instead? Old habits die hard, Madam Speaker. So the government doubled down on hunters and sport shooters. Now sport shooters are often turned around at the border, and even if they go through the exhaustive paperwork, jumping through all the hoops, they often have equipment wrongfully seized, which takes them months to get back. In the meantime, illegal firearms stream across the border where CBSA agents, already understaffed, are stretched thin, trying to slow the flow. In the meantime, illegal firearms stream across the border where CBA agents, already understaffed, are stretching thin to try slowing down the flow. After a decade of Liberal governance, gun-related crime is up 116%. 85% of gun offences are committed using illegal firearms from the United States. Canadian security services have also identified 350 organized crime rings operating within our borders, 63 of which have international connections to China, Mexico, and other nations. Conservatives would like to see Liberals scrap their failed gun buyback program, which, over 4 years and $67 million later, has failed to get a single gun off the street, and redirect this money into stopping illegal firearms from entering the country. That way, the government can target criminals rather than law-abiding Canadians. After years of the CBSA and Conservatives calling for more resources at the border to combat the multitude of trafficking that occurs, the government had another bright idea. They purchased 2 Black Hawk helicopters to patrol the border and stop smugglers. On the surface, the purchase of new equipment seems good, but in practical terms, it was another Liberal nothing burger. Our border with the United States is just under 8,900 kilometers. Having 2 helicopters to cover that large of a distance, even if they are both working at the same time, is a ludicrous proposition. Instead of hiring more CBSA agents to help staunch the flow of illegal firearms and drugs, they've spent millions of dollars to lease these helicopters for a few months. The work of our border agents has been continually hampered by this Liberal government as they refused to recognize where and what the problems were. The government has been asked repeatedly by border agents, their unions, and other Canadians with common sense to give more resources to the CBSA so that they could properly staff border crossings and deal with the crime at the border. While the Liberals would have us believe that there is finally some movement on addressing the serious issues at the border, we must remember that most of the issues were created or exacerbated by 10 years of Liberal incompetence and inaction. The reality is the Liberals, with the help of their NDP partners, lost control of the border and only scrambled to act when warnings from another country came, calling for them to fix their disastrous, broken border policy. As I mentioned earlier, this is sweeping legislation. I note that the Liberals have adopted some of the Conservative stance to strengthen border security and crack down on criminals. The government has promised that they will invest $300 million into border investigation and scanners. This is welcome news. Conservatives have been calling for more resources for our agents at the border to stem the flow of illegal firearms and drugs for years. Only 1% of shipping containers are inspected coming into our country, allowing drugs and guns to sneak through in the other 99%. However, true to form, the government has offered no timeline for when this investment would be made and the resources would reach the border. The Liberal track record of making funding announcements and then sitting back and assuming someone else is going to do the job has shown a lack of transparency and trustworthiness. This brings into question the government's ability to execute on this promise. Additionally, the past 10 years have shown that the Liberals always find a way to make these funding commitments work best for their friends and Liberal insiders. We only need to look back at what happened during COVID, when the Liberal government handed a $237 million contract to their former MP and colleague and future leadership candidate, Frank Bayless. While this was an obvious conflict of interest, they pressed on with the contract for ventilators, claiming they were necessary. Then, just a few years later, it quietly came to light that the government sold the ventilators for pennies on the dollar for scrap. However, it didn't matter because yet another Liberal insider got to pad his pockets. Another example is the Arrive scam scandal. The Liberals seized the opportunity of a crisis to spend at least $60 million on a simple app. After a study at committee and reviews by the Procurement Ombudsman and the Auditor General, it was clear that the government had funneled money to fraudulent consultants without no care for how much they were spending. Lastly, I want to point to the example of McKinsey, a company which got special access to government contracts because their managing partner at the time, Dominic Barton, was personal friends with Justin Trudeau. McKinsey made $100 million from that relationship, which again was found to be improper by the Auditor General. This is why it is so difficult to take this government at their word. Each one of these procurements was justified as necessary by the government at the time, and each one was plagued by corruption and incompetency. So fast forward to today, Madam Speaker, where the government is promising to spend $300 million on a large procurement project in the midst of a crisis. And I have huge reservations about trusting their judgment when it comes to who those millions of dollars will go to. Will it be another former Liberal MP? Will it be another friend of the Prime Minister? We've seen the reports that Brookfield firms reached out to the Prime Minister just days after he took office. Will one of these firms receive contracts for this new border initiative? Another issue with these large procurements is that we know the Prime Minister has financial holdings in companies which he has failed to disclose to Canadians. So it is possible that when these initiatives cross his desk, there may be certain companies which will be looked upon more favorably. Without knowing which companies the Prime Minister has a financial interest in, it is difficult to scrutinize the government spending that he approves. That is why I hope the Prime Minister will disclose his assets sooner than later, so Canadians can hold his government to account for any favoritism that may be shown in the procurement process. Along with this bill, we need to see movement on bail and sentencing reform. Many of the issues at the border originate in our cities. Over the past 10 years, there has been a drastic increase in crime across the country. The fentanyl crisis has found a home here in Canada under this Liberal government. Fentanyl super labs are being set up to ship this deadly drug across Canada and abroad. And these super labs have flourished under their watch. Over the past 9 years, over 49,000 Canadians have died from opioid overdoses. Despite this number, the Prime Minister has claimed that it is not a crisis, just a challenge. This crisis needs to be addressed, both at the border and in our cities, to combat the flow of fentanyl and its ingredients, which are primarily coming from China and Mexico. By stemming the flow of these ingredients at the border, we can alleviate some of the pressure on our police forces across the country, which are dealing with this crisis. While measures for the border are needed to crack down on the smuggling of illegal firearms and drugs, we also need to address the issue that is stretching our police forces thin: easy-to-get bail laws. In 2022, 256 people were killed by someone out on bail. This constitutes 29% of all homicides committed that year. Liberal catch-and-release policies have devastated communities across Canada. We are in desperate need of bail reform, which Conservatives have been calling for years. Recently, the Liberals finally admitted their mistake and have agreed that the Conservative push for bail reform is the only way forward. In the throne speech, the Liberals stated, and I quote, "The government will bring a renewed focus on car theft and home invasions by toughening the criminal code to make bail harder to get for repeat offenders charged with committing these crimes, along with human trafficking and drug smuggling," end quote. While we have numerous examples of the Liberals plagiarizing the Conservative platform, one measure that we would encourage them to undertake is adopting our position on bail reform. The past 10 years of soft on crime policies and easy bail for violent repeat offenders has caused untold misery across Canada. While they cannot undo the past 10 years of tragedies, the government can alleviate some of the pressure on our police forces by making bail more difficult to get for repeat violent offenders. By keeping these criminals in jail rather than letting them back out onto the street within hours of their arrest, our police will be able to better serve their communities, since they won't keep getting calls to deal with the same offenders. Repeat violent offenders deserve jail, not bail. It's time the Liberals put victims first instead of the criminals who victimize them. I look forward to the day that the government adopts and implements more Conservative policies regarding crime, so that Canadians can once again live on safe streets and in safe communities. There are already concerns around privacy being raised regarding this bill. It is always a concern for Canadians when the government asks for sweeping new powers in a large omnibus bill, particularly powers which deal with their privacy and appear to infringe on it. One area that has raised concerns is the section of the bill which amends the Canada Post Act. By broadening the ability of the government to open mail outside of the current restrictions held within the Canada Post Corporation Act, the Customs Act, and the Proceeds of Crime Money Laundering Act and Terrorist Financing Act, The government is causing deep concern and anxiety amongst Canadians about their privacy. The government must ensure that strict rules remain in place and must provide a more comprehensive response as to when this would be justifiable. And as my colleague pointed out earlier today, is this charter compliant? Additionally, Part 14 of this bill, which would amend the criminal code to allow access to basic information from public service providers, permits peace officers to access certain data without a warrant, and it would relax warrant requirements and streamline data collection. This has come under serious scrutiny as experts have raised concerns about the impact on the privacy that these changes will have, on the privacy of Canadians that it will have. The government must continue its consultations on privacy issues that are being raised with this bill in order to ensure that innocent Canadians do not have their privacy breached. Madam Speaker, I do look forward to more robust debate on this bill and the committee study that will follow. We all know that Canadians are counting on us in this place to make the changes needed to secure our border. After 10 years of mismanagement and a porous border, it is time for the government to reverse their disastrous policies. It is time for them to take border security seriously. Conservatives ran on a promise to secure the border, and we are prepared to support tougher measures, especially those that address the myriads of issues created by the past decade of Liberal failures. And as I said, Madam Speaker, I do look forward to the rest of the debate on this bill. I look forward to when this bill is referred to committee and the committee undertakes a comprehensive review of this study and to see what amendments may come forward in order to address the gaps that often always accompany a bill that is introduced by this government. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the member for her intervention and her speech. I know that she cares deeply about this issue, and I'm hoping that she will support this piece of legislation as it's been endorsed by many of our policing agencies as being important legislation. But one group that I would like to mention in particular, the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, They have stated that the proposed changes by federal government would reduce barriers Canadian police face when investigating the growing number of online crimes against children. We have the full support of their organization. What this member or what this organization has stated is, and what we know today, is that cyber crimes have evolved at a pace that government has not been able to keep up with. I'm wondering if the member would agree with that and find that these subscriber information and data privacy issues are really important. It's really important to make these changes so that we can keep up with the criminals.
The Honourable Member for Carleton Trail Eagle Creek.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And while I do not live in a border community, I know that the issues that stem from not having a secure border are far-reaching across our country and cross a myriad of issues that need to be addressed. As I stated in my speech, this bill amends 9 other acts and introduces a new one. It is a large omnibus bill with many different aspects that will have knock-on effects. And as always, the devil is in the detail. As I said in my speech, I do believe that it's important that we have a robust debate and study this bill intensely at the proper committee. Concerns have been raised about this bill, and I'm sure it will continue to be raised as more people are consulted and are able to review the legislation, and I look forward to hearing what the results of those consultations are. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Thank you very much. I would like to commend my colleague for her re-election. Under the Harper government, cuts were made to the CBSA. That was a report published in 2015 that made that recommendation. But now the Conservatives' recommendation, now they're in the opposition, is the contrary. Now they agree to increase CBSA staff to have better security. So I would like my colleague to explain me very simply, why was it not a priority in 2015, but now they're in the opposition, they want to increase CBSA staffing?
For Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I disagree with the premise of that question. Conservatives have always been concerned with security at our border, and we have been long calling for decisive action to protect Canada's borders, and we continue to do so. This government has been in government for 10 years, and it took 10 years for them to introduce this piece of legislation. We know that it's coming at the 11th hour, that time is of the essence in order to get this legislation through the House and potentially passed. And I do understand that they would like this to happen quickly, but we're not going to rush this. We are going to take the time to look at the legislation, to make sure that it addresses all of the issues that need to be addressed, and it will get the scrutiny it deserves. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Election was on April the 28th. New Prime Minister, new government, Bill number 2, the very first piece of legislation. Now, she wants to reflect on past governments. Remember, it was Stephen Harper. She was a part of that government that actually cut hundreds of millions of dollars towards border control, not to mention border control officers that were cut from the system. This does the absolute opposite of what Stephen Harper did. She knows that, Madam Speaker. My question is very simple. Will she join the Canadian Police Association, thousands of law enforcement officers that are on the street today, and their association that are in support of the legislation? Will the Conservative Party today support this legislation and see it go to committee sooner as opposed to later?
The Honourable Member for Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
And there it is, Madam Speaker. Exactly what I said in response to the previous question. It took this Liberal government, they want us to believe they're new Prime Minister, new government. They are not. They've been in power for 10 years and did nothing to address the issues regarding border security. They keep hearkening back a decade ago, when they've had a decade to do what needed to be done, to do what Canadians have been calling on them to do. And now, again, as I've stated, I know they want to ram through this legislation. As in many cases in the past, the imperative is created, got to get it done, because they didn't get it done over the last 10 years. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Nicola.
Madam Speaker, it's always a pleasure to rise on behalf of the people from Kamloops, Thompson, Nicola. Before I begin, I want to recognize a young man named Jasper Phillips, who recently received the Chief Scout Award for fundraising for robotic kits, over $1,000. We thank him for his service. To my honourable colleague, I always really enjoy speaking with her, and I was actually just looking at a report from Staff Sergeant Josh Rhoda of the Merritt RCMP, a community of 7,000. Staff Sergeant Rhoda reported that the Merritt RCMP have already seized 69 firearms this year. Just this last month, one being a sawed-off shotgun. This is what we need to address, in my view. This bill does none of that. Would my honourable colleague agree? Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Carlton Trail, Eagle Creek.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I do thank my honourable colleague for the question. I know he's been very instrumental in reviewing this piece of legislation, and I absolutely agree with his observations, and I know that we've heard more stories like the one that he just cited for us here now in this place. I believe that the government needs to ensure that this legislation is going to be robust, and as opposition, we are going to do the same in addressing the concerns that he just cited. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Winnipeg Centre.
so much, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her intervention. It's really troubling to me that the Liberal government is trying to push through an omnibus bill over 120 pages. I'm wondering if she agrees with me that perhaps this legislations, we need to push the government to ensure that we can look at the legislation separately and get it out of an omnibus bill.
Well, member for Carleton Trail Eagle Creek.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I do agree with my colleague. I thank her for the question. Despite the title of this bill, as I mentioned in my speech, it does go beyond its stated aim to secure our borders. It is a sweeping piece of legislation that stretches far beyond immigration and national security and securing our borders. And I do think that it is an attempt to use the guise of border security to push through other unrelated measures, and that they are hoping that Canadians aren't paying attention. So I would suggest that as consultations are undertaken, as this bill is referred to committee, each member of that committee, and certainly the opposition, should be calling for time to review this piece of legislation, every piece of it, in order to make sure that it addresses the concerns for which it is intended. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Edmonton West.
Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech today. I just want to, before I give my question, I want to put something to rest, hopefully once and for all. We've heard the member from Winnipeg North and others repeat the same false narrative about everything's okay that we haven't done the last 10 years, because of Harper cut. I'd like him to take a look, and the Liberals, and everyone in this House, to take a look at the public accounts. These are nonpartisan numbers put forward by the government. These are real numbers of spending. When Harper left, adjusted for Liberal inflation, the Liberals are actually spending $200 million less on CBSA than they took over. So I think the government should actually end that false narrative, stop misinforming Canadians, and actually start spouting the truth about what's going on at the border. But I wonder if my colleague could explain, or perhaps answer, why do you think government is pushing a false narrative instead of answering important questions today on this debate about this border bill?
Very brief answer from the Honourable Member for Carleton Trail Eagle Creek.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate that member's question, and I appreciate the attention that he pays to the financial reports. I know that numbers don't lie, and I agree with him that it's time they come clean and admit to their failures over the last 10 years.